I thank him for that nice introduction. Somebody gave me an introduction like that one time, and afterwards they said, well, you must have achieved everything in life that you ever dreamed of as a kid. And I said, well, I'm not sure of that, but when I was a kid, I had a very bad barber, and I dreamed at that time of being bald. And I have achieved that much. I'm going to take, I hope something was kind of an interesting tact with you, and you'll have to agree with my thesis to understand where I go in the rest of my remarks. My thesis is that we truly do live in revolutionary times, and what we have happening at the present time is literally 4 revolutions taking place simultaneously, any one of which would have changed the world as we know it. Those 4 revolutions are a political revolution, an economic revolution, a cultural revolution, and a technological revolution, all that are happening at the same time, and all that are interacting with each other in a way to create complexities like the world has never seen before. If you look at the political revolution, the whole political revolution of individual empowerment is a global change that will continue to roll out for at least this century and probably well beyond. If you look at the economic revolution, we have gone from an industrial economy to an information economy on a global scale. And at the same time, what we've done is we've globalized the economy so that the decisions made all over the world have an impact on the economies of everyone else. If you look at cultural revolutions, you have just significant revolutions taking place because of education, religion, all kinds of things that are interacting with their political and economic lives. And then the technological revolution should be obvious to everyone. Senator Bryan held up his iPhone. A few years ago, that would have been considered an absolute miracle to have that much information with each person being able to carry it with them. But I'll go into some other things here that are also a part of that technological revolution, because I think to understand the whole of it, you have to understand that the technology really is at a base of a lot of this change. But the point is that this interaction is making the world more complex. And what that has done is changed the world of diplomacy. It's changed the world of diplomacy because in the past, diplomacy was largely exercised in the political and economic arenas. And the truth was that information was power. Individual people worldwide, including in even the freest of nations like some of the European nations, like the US, the individual citizen did not have all of the information that was being acted upon in the diplomatic world. In fact, they had probably a very small portion of it because information was power, and the power was retained within bureaucracies. And those bureaucracies were the interaction that took place on a global scale. Today, throughout the world, individuals have more information at their fingertips than the top government decision maker had just about 3 decades ago. And that has given a total new perspective to what individuals are capable of doing. Power is no longer concentrated. Power is diffused. With the diffusion of power comes the necessity to recognize that in our diplomatic lives. The whole matrix of decision-making has changed as a result of this reality. Governments must respond instantaneously to information that has been transmitted worldwide. If an incident takes place, it's known across the world. Now, the information that's transmitted may not even be accurate. But the fact is it has an impact. And governments have the need then to respond to it. And bureaucracies in government tend to be slow and cumbersome. And as a result, they often don't react very well. And we run into problems because government is not acting at the speed of information. So that can adversely impact many, many relationships and cultures. Look, at the base of many of the international conflicts of today are religious differences broadly defined. In the past, you could have religious practices that were largely isolated. often as narrow as the village level. And there were things taking place in some of those isolated instances that would be seen by the wider world as terrible violations of human rights. For instance, the inability of women to get education as a result of some of those practices. Now the wider world does get a chance to see these things. Those isolated instances are not as clear, and it causes international repercussions that then have political consequences. That's the world in which we live. My friend Mario Andretti, who is a former international auto racing champion, one time had a quote that said, "If you're in control, you're not going fast enough." You know, that's the world in which we live today. That the moment you think you have your arms wrapped around something and that you're in control of it, the fact is in business your competitor is breathing down your neck. And in government, it means that you have not totally analyzed the situation and are not ahead of it. So how has that come about? Well, it's because we have a lot of technology these days that has significant economic consequences. And it is rapidly becoming more and more obvious. I'll give you an example. We are going to move in this century, almost definitely, to electricity as the way in which we provide mobility. Now today, it's batteries that are being used, but we're rapidly moving toward fuel cells. There will be hydrogen fuel cells that will replace much of the need for batteries in mobility. And we also then go to the next generation of nuclear, which is the high temperature gas-cooled reactors that just incidentally not only provide baseload power for lighting up cities and running industries and so on, but the byproduct of those reactors is hydrogen, which means that you get a twofer out of them, that the hydrogen then can be used for your mobility. Well, that has economic consequences for lots of people. A whole lot of nations that have built their economies around carbon-based solutions will find themselves without a product that the world is looking for. Now that transition will take some time, but nevertheless, if you're planning ahead, you have to say to yourself, you know, we need to be on, if we're going to be on the cutting edge, we need to understand that this is the direction that we're going. And the fact is, we're going there vastly more rapidly than most people think. The Korean car company Hyundai has introduced the fuel cell cars in their own country, but as of June 11th of this year, a couple of weeks ago, they sold their first mass-produced fuel cell car in California. And that will be an evolving kind of situation. There's a revolution taking place in food production. Good thing. But we need to recognize that it also has significant implications going forward. For example, if you take the rice gene to the International Space Station and you take it into a laboratory, the rice gene has never experienced weightlessness. So it throws up all of its defenses. And you can then begin to engineer the rice gene. And one of the things you can do is you can engineer out its defenses against being grown in brackish water. So you can produce a rice plant that can be grown in brackish water, which then expands rice production worldwide by probably 3 or 4 times. Does that change the face of agriculture in many countries and so on? Yeah. Probably changes the cost structure in agriculture in major ways, which will have a very big implication to it. There's another product that has been created for space. We created a product so that if we were traveling to Mars, you'd be able to grow the plants more quickly, and you would be able to get bigger fruit, bigger plants. They would be able to grow in drought conditions, and you'd be able to introduce minerals into the plant that otherwise wouldn't be there. This is a totally organic product that has been developed as a part of the space program. It's now rolling out into the agricultural world, which means that that these kinds of plants can now be grown by farmers worldwide. In the initial instances, we've grown potatoes about this big. Again, it has an implication for agricultural economies going forward. And then in the whole world of nanotechnologies, nanotechnology can be done a variety of things, and I don't intend to go into all of it right now, but nanotechnology is allowing us to create, for instance, a lot greater artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence will go into robotics. Robotics will have the ability to be expanded broadly throughout societies. And give you one place where at least the Japanese have been doing a lot of experimenting, and that is in robotics for home health care, where all of a sudden, instead of having to send people out of their homes to a nursing home to be cared for in their older age, they could be cared for at home by robots who are trained to provide them with the medicine they need, can take them back and forth, can do all kinds of work and so on. What does that mean in terms of a huge industry in the United States, for example, of nursing homes? My old congressional district has become kind of a nursing home center. And there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of nursing homes in that area. So what happens when people can elect to stay home rather than be farmed away to a nursing home? Changes the economy in some remarkable ways. Nanotechnology is bringing about new materials. There's a material now called graphene. Graphene is a very interesting material because if in very, very lightweight forms and so on, sometimes only atoms thick, it has the strength of steel, but yet is totally bendable and so on. Again, for manufacturing purposes, think of, for instance, automobiles made of graphene, but what does that do to the aluminum industry? That's just now beginning to see a climb as people need lighter weight vehicles, so on. They've moved to aluminum. Well, here's a new material coming down the pike that would change things for them. So what I would say to you is that all of this complexity has to become the substance of diplomacy. We have to move from large macro decisions made by bureaucracies that can't even keep up with the pace of change that I've just talked about, to micro decisions that are in many ways more difficult, but in many ways more positive as well. And that probably means moving from multilateral decision making to bilateral decision making. And we're already seeing a lot of that take place. So if you look diplomatically across the world, many countries are moving toward an expansion of their bilateral relationships. I'm the chairman of the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue. It is an informal dialogue at the highest levels of both governments. So that bilateral relationship is an important relationship for both countries, and they work very hard at maintaining that. They're both a part of multilateral relationships as well, but the bilateral relationship has become substantive to them. That's a direction we will probably end up going. We cannot stop, nor should we try to stop, this ever increasing pace of technological change. But the cultural and political and economic consequences that follow will be very significant. We are probably going to see in the future of diplomacy a move from much of the political decision-making toward the cultural. And much of the economic will move toward the technological. And, that carries with it, a challenge. I understand from what Senator Bryan said and so on, Ambassador, that you made mention of challenges. Well, here's a huge one for the rest of this century, is moving in ways that diplomacy has never been done. It's been done one way for centuries. Now we're talking about moving it toward very different kinds of structures. Diplomacy will become the art of not finding one international solution for problems, but adopting multiple solutions toward common goals. That will be a true challenge. Diplomacy will have to include non-state actors as well as governments. I mean, how do you start talking about the information revolution? How do you start talking about personal privacy and all this, and only talk about the National Security Agency of the United States or security agencies of other countries? You got to include Google. And so somewhere along the line, you've got to put those pieces together. And diplomacy will not always be able to wait on bureaucratic decisions. This is one of my favorite topics, because I really do believe at the present time that we need substantive government reform, not only in the area of diplomacy and foreign policy. We need substantial government reform, period, because the bureaucracies that were put in place for the industrial societies simply have no place in the quick-paced atmosphere of the 21st century. It takes 18 months to do one budget in the United States government. That is, if you can get it done at all, or if you do it perfectly. It takes 18 months. In 18 months, 6 generations of technology have come and gone. And government thinks it's going to get ahead of the curve. So somewhere the pace of government has to match the pace of the world. And the pace of the world will have to be settled with a diplomacy that has changed substantially. Let me cut it off there. Be happy to take questions. Well, for one thing, I mean, wiretapping is kind of an old technology. I mean, everything exists in the cloud now. You don't have to pull it down by wire. You don't have to tap into it and so on. I mean, it exists as a part of an information cloud, and so that's a fairly old technology. Drones, I got to tell you, we're not going to stop them. They're going to be ubiquitous. My wife has a drone. We purchased it at Brookstone. You can fly it out and so on. It can take pictures when it goes, so on. The chances of us changing that kind of situation are practically nil. I mean, Amazon is looking at delivering its products by drone. There are already drones being used in many applications that we haven't even spent a lot of time understanding. So what we have to do is recognize the reality that all these technologies are going to be with us. And my point is, with regard to personal privacy and what we referred to as wiretapping, that we've got to bring in all of the elements of that as a part of the discussion. And so you can't have government regulation, or you can't have international solutions that ignore the fact that many people are personally giving up their rights to privacy by going into the internet and saying in an agreement that they probably never even read that I give this company permission to look at everything I'm doing. And we're going to have to deal with those individual decisions as well as the more macro bureaucratic decisions. We are in the process of doing some reforms on NSA and some of the things inside the government to assure that, that we behave in a manner that the world can accept. But I just think that we kid ourselves if we believe that some of those changes that we're making in our policy will change the nature of the personal privacy issue, because the personal privacy issue is being impacted far more by the private sector now than it is the public sector. Well, I think my best example would be the one I mentioned as I spoke to you, and that is that that you see vastly more activity in bilateral relationships now than in multilateral relationships. That is a sign of more micro decision making as opposed to macro decision making, and it seems to me that's the fundamental trend that's there. You also do see the larger information companies. I mentioned Google, but others who are engaged in international relations of their own. There are some countries that would like to freeze out certain practices of these companies, and so they get engaged in their own diplomacy. Well, I mean, at least insofar as our State Department goes, we actually have people inside the State Department who are devoted, for instance, to space policy, who are devoted to communications policy, who are devoted to dealing with some of these technological issues and so on. And most of their talk is, again, bilateral in nature rather than multilateral, because it's very difficult to get agreements on a lot of those issues on a broad scale. But you can often get agreements between individual countries about how to react. I think that's a huge challenge. I mean, the fact is that the developed world will adopt a lot of these things earlier. On the other hand, it presents an opportunity for the underdeveloped world, because they can skip whole generations of technology that are now in place and go directly to the new technologies. For example, I mean, one of the problems that we have in this country is convincing some of our established communications providers who have spent billions upon billions, hundreds of billions of dollars building infrastructure that's essentially wired infrastructure, that we ought to go immediately to Wi-Fi applications or laser applications or all of those things. Their economic models didn't anticipate that. This came on vastly more quickly than they thought possible. Well, in a lot of underdeveloped nations, they've simply gone directly to Wi-Fi. They've got their communication systems are obviously rudimentary compared to the ones in developed countries, but nevertheless, they know the road that they're on. In mobility, as I mentioned, my guess is that a lot of developing countries in mobility will move immediately to battery technology, because it means that as they build new power plants and so on, there will be an economic advantage to investing in those plants if they have both the ability to light up cities, but also to provide the transportation network. And so in terms of attracting investment for the future and investment in the new technologies, there are a lot of the developing countries and underdeveloped countries that do have an opportunity here. Absolutely the case, and that's where the opportunity in the 21st century exists for countries that now are seen as developing or underdeveloped. There's a lot of innovation that goes on inside the military, and some of the top research goes on at places like DARPA, the research branch of the Pentagon. The fact is that the Pentagon suffers from some of the same problems as society as a whole, and that is keeping obsolete weapons sometimes becomes a political issue because those weapons have to be built in some powerful congressman's district, and he makes certain that they stay online. We have a battle right now over an airplane called the A-10 as to whether or not we're going to retire it. The Air Force says they want to retire it. Congress says, no, you can't retire it. So, our budgets, our military budgets, have hundreds of millions and probably hundreds of billions of dollars of weaponry in them that probably should be regarded as obsolete. So the military is on both sides of that equation in some instances. With regard to the Israeli-U.S. relationship, that military relationship has always been strong and remains strong. And what we've seen in the past is that the Israelis have been able to take systems developed in the United States and upgrade them with some of their own technologies. They did upgrades to the F-16 along the way that were quite remarkable. So, the good news about some of these developments is that no one ever wants to go to war. You do not want to have the breakdown that puts you in a position of having to kill your fellow human beings. On the other hand, some of the new modern technologies have made it possible to more accurately target the enemy than we were able to do in the past. If you look back at World War II, when we literally flattened whole cities in order to get one factory, because we didn't have the precision to do it the right way. The new precision weapons do have some ability to protect civilian populations better than what we have in the past. Well, I don't have a terrific global perspective on this, but I can tell it you from the U.S. standpoint is that many of the young people are the innovators in this new economy. The 20 and 30-year-olds who are multi-millionaires these days as a result of the innovations that they have done in the information revolution have become extremely powerful politically. Now, that doesn't mean that they're in the government, but they have become extremely powerful. Elon Musk happens to be a friend of mine who is the guy who's doing SpaceX and the Tesla automobiles. Elon Musk is an extremely powerful political force at the present time who invented PayPal some years ago when he was in his 20s. He, and he's using the wealth that he got from that to do vastly more innovation. So it seems to me that the young people who have a far better ability to understand apps, if you will, than people in my generation do, are basically inventing the future themselves. And much of the political establishment, the older political establishment, is literally following in their wake at the present time because the growth of the economy is largely dependent upon the things that the young people are inventing in the information age. And so, that's true power. That's real power. And that power will get translated into the political as we go by. But at the present time, a lot of those innovators that I happen to know personally have no desire whatsoever to be in the government because they see the government as old, stodgy, way behind the times. Why would I want to spend my time sitting in meetings with bureaucrats to get things done? I want to do it now. And that's not where the political establishment is at the present time. Well, my initial response is invent it. Because I think if you wait for governments to put this kind of opportunity into place, you'll wait a long, long time. All of that social interaction done through Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those things, Twitter, you invented. It was the young people who invented all that, and a lot of us sat there and said, "Why would I want to be on Facebook?" And and then we began to realize that there were real economic reasons for being a part of LinkedIn, for example. That all of this became consequential. And so you may be far better at building those systems than the political establishment is. And the fact is that what you'd find is a pretty welcome attitude by the political establishment is if you could come up with ideas for beginning an international dialogue among young people about how to shape the future in a positive way. My guess is that you'd find a lot of receptiveness to that amongst people in the political establishment, because they're struggling with that at the present time, and and we're struggling with the downsides of that. I mean, literally, I mean, every day there is warfare going on in the information world. I was in China not too long ago, and I was at Alibaba, looking at what they're doing there, and there were several floors that we were told we were not to go on. We assumed that those might be communicating with the U.S. as we spoke, there are just those are realities. If you could figure out some way to overcome some of those problems, it would be extremely welcome in the world today. Well, freedom and opportunity. That we believe that people who are free to make their own decisions, free to elect their own leaders, free to build their own countries and so on, that expands the chances that there will be opportunity in those societies, and that the more that you can open up the doors to opportunity, the more that you will raise your economic circumstances, and that's what we try to promote. We do it imperfectly, but in my view, the internet and a lot of these new technologies expand the ability to talk in those terms. One of the problems we have is that there are nations that don't want a free interchange of ideas. That they fear that in their own countries, because they are still locked into this idea that they can control everything, and that's the way in which they deal with their people. Well, and we sometimes do a very bad job. I agree with Senator Bryan. We sometimes do a very bad job of communicating our values to the world. And it's because for a long time we have been the nation that sits at the top of the pyramid, and that sometimes inspires jealousy. There are all kinds of reasons for people to take a swing. We have not been very good at saying, we don't want to occupy anybody. We're not fighting these battles around the world. We're not using our power in ways to dominate other countries. We want to simply give them the opportunities to shape their own destinies. I don't think at times that comes through very well.